Hello friends, it's Meg, and today I'll be talking about how to be consistent with your bullet journal. So I actually learned about the bullet journal method when I was in high school, and I really tried hard to implement it in the many times that I've encountered it throughout my high school career, but it just never stuck. But in the last few years in university and now out of university, I have been able to implement the bullet journal method consistently in my life. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how I was able to achieve that, how I was able to go from someone who would set up her yearly spread in the beginning of January and never touch it again in that year, to someone who actually bullet journals every day and interacts with her bullet journal at least once every day. So before we get into how I was actually able to become consistent with my bullet journal, I want to talk a little bit about the things that prevented me from being consistent with my bullet journal, the don'ts, if you will. And the first and very important thing you do not want to do is to set everything up in one go. I used to do this at the beginning of January or at the beginning of the month. Whenever I would be re-inspired by the bullet journal method, I would be like, okay, I'm gonna set up the entire month and just have it ready so that I can, get started and really be on top of everything. And while that mentality and motivation was really positive and really good, I struggled with keeping up with my bullet journal because I had set everything up and I was exhausted. I was getting the satisfaction of setting something up and then never using it again, because I was already satisfied with the product that I had created, which is just the layout. And upon reflection, I found that because I was setting up my bullet journal way in advance, or starting with the month or the year, I was having a hard time actually seeing how I would use it. And so whenever it came time to actually use it, I was already demotivated because, I had already gotten the satisfaction of setting everything up, which was the fun part. And then when I went to go actually input the data, go through the process itself, I found that a lot of the things just didn't work for me, and I had already committed so many hours. I couldn't justify changing it, but a change needed to happen in order for me to actually be able to use it because it was not working. So I think that's the biggest don't in bullet journal, is to set everything up in advance and spend a lot of time doing it. But the other thing that I want to caution against is getting too fancy with your setups too quickly. I found that when I was setting up these elaborate spreads, I would use a lot of markers, stickers, decorate, and it just got overwhelming really quickly. And obviously I wasn't using the system, so I didn't know what I needed. I was putting the aesthetic of it all before the function. And so that's another don't. And another thing I want to caution against is to copy and paste other people's spreads into your bullet journal. Especially when you're first starting out, it can be really tempting to copy and paste other people's spreads to, really feel like you're doing the thing, right? But a lot of the times, because bullet journals are so customizable, we get lost in the weeds of it all and end up setting up spreads that we don't actually need, or projecting the aspirations we have on our bullet journal instead of making it a functional tool for ourselves. And I found that that was also a really big reason that I ended up not continuing with the bullet journal method when I was younger, because I would just have all these spreads and trackers that I could not fill on a daily basis. It's really good to gain inspiration from other people, because there's a lot of creative people out there, but it should just be that inspiration. It should never be, this is the textbook way to do it. So now that we've got the don'ts out of the way, let's talk about the do's. How did I go from being someone who abandoned their notebook day 2 into actually bullet journaling to someone who has consistently bullet journaled on and off for a couple of years now? I think the first mindset shift that happened for me and the bullet journal method actually clicked with me was when I just stripped it down to the basics and was like, okay, we're not going to deal with all the bells and whistles. We're not going to decorate. We're not going to add stickers. We're not really going to do anything except for the core principles of bullet journaling. And that's where I started. I didn't even set up a weekly spread, a monthly spread, really. I just really started with the daily log and, wrote out my events, my tasks, and took it each day at a time. And that's really when it started to stick for me, because I was creating a routine. And I think that's the really important thing about bullet journaling and being consistent with your bullet journal, is to try to interact with it at least once every day. And interaction can mean a lot of different things. It could mean, opening opening up the notebook and writing out all your tasks. It could also just mean like opening the notebook and looking at your past entries and being like, oh, this is what I did yesterday, and kind of reflecting. Making it a habit to sit down and interact with your notebook in some form really creates this habit and routine to trust your notebook and to have it be a place where you check in with yourself every day. That's the first thing I think that's really important, is to create a routine out of your bullet journal practice. But in order to make it a routine, you have to get over the initial hump of perfectionism. I found that a lot of times, I talked about in the don't section that I set up my bullet journal way in advance when I was failing. And that just created this sense of like perfectionism where I felt like I couldn't write anything down unless it was set in stone, or like it had to be in my perfect handwriting, it had to be written perfectly and displayed perfectly. And that just gave me a lot of anxiety and also a lot of resistance towards actually using the setups that I created, because I just felt like I was going to ruin a perfect thing by, interacting with it in any way. And so I think in order for you to make it a habit, it's important to try to get over the perfectionism. And some tangible ways that I've been able to implement this is to mess up or ruin the first page of the notebook. And what I mean by that is, I think we can all relate to the feeling of like opening up a new notebook and just being daunted by like the blank page and being like, the first stroke has to be perfect. So instead of, letting that fear build up, what I do is sometimes I just start at the back of the notebook and start doing a pen test and scribble some stuff at the back of the notebook. And that just kind of releases the pressure a little bit, because it's like, okay, like I've written stuff in this notebook and it doesn't have to be perfect. Because it's a pen test, like you can't mess it up. So, it's a great way to get to know your notebook and the paper that you're using, but it's also a great way to break in the notebook mentally to be like, okay, like it's actually not that big of a deal. So that's one thing I really like to do, and something that I recommend for everyone if you're using a bound notebook. And another thing that I found helped me a lot in my bullet journal journey was to get a notebook with a lot of pages. I think a lot of times when you have a really nice notebook, you really feel the price of the paper, if that makes sense. You like feel like you're burning pages when you're writing in them, and you start to like unconsciously weigh whether something is worth writing down or not. And that's just not a fun place to be in. It's not a great way to actually implement the bullet journal method. And so I found that getting a notebook such as this Stalogy 365 notebook that I'm using right now has really helped me to kind of get over that. There's like 368 or 66 pages in this notebook, and so it takes a lot to fill them up. And so whenever I mess up on a page, or like I want to start over in a different page, like I don't feel like I'm wasting pages or like ruining the notebook by having like a few pages with a little bit more blank space. So I recommend getting a notebook that you feel comfortable in. And the final mental shift that really helped me to get consistent with my notebook was to realize that changing up my setup is okay. Even when I first started becoming consistent with my bullet journal practice, I hit a point where the way that I was setting up the spreads just stopped working for me, just because like the stage of life changed, the way that I was using the pages changed. It was just like, it no longer worked. It served me for a period of time, but it stopped working. And I felt a lot of guilt and like a lot of resistance towards changing up my setup. But I realized later down the line that no, actually this is like what's beautiful about the bullet journal method, is that it's super customizable and it can grow with you and really evolve and change with you. And so I really want to encourage anyone who's been able to be consistent but feel like they're hitting a wall to kind of, go out there and experiment with the setups. It doesn't have to be perfect. You might hate it, but you never know until you try, right? It's been a bit of a rambly video, but I hope that if you're struggling with being consistent with your bullet journal, or you feel like you're hitting a wall with your setup, that you found some nuggets to be helpful. This is just my personal experience and I'm sharing what worked for me. It might not work for you, but I'm hoping it does, because it does really suck when you set something up and it just doesn't work, or you're just not feeling it anymore, So I hope that this can give you some sort of guidance to figure out what's not working and get to somewhere where you feel happy with your practice. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!